I'm sure a lot of people have questions about the influence. If you're a CBS affiliate, how much influence does CBS have on what you're talking about? I often say, as a reporter, I was out doing my own local fact finding, so it wasn't really as influential as, say, it probably was for the producers of the show that, again, didn't have a lot of time to go back to your original point. And so they're just going through and they're just copying and pasting. But I do remember very specifically one time when I came back and was quite frustrated that I had to do a story on the Clean Water Act, didn't have time to read the Senate report that I really needed to understand it. And the anchor that had been at my station for decades, literally, leader in the field, said, just say what NBC says. They're usually right. And I was sitting there like, I'm one of the only environmental reporters full-time for a TV station in the entire country. And I know for a fact, I don't even think NBC has one of those. There's no way NBC knows more than I do about this issue. I'm not just going to regurgitate what NBC says. But that was a frustrating moment for me, because it was just like, just say what they say. Like even the people within the industry who have been in there for decades are just saying that that's an okay way to do reporting. And to me, it's like, have you seen some of the stuff that they're putting on the news? And like, can we just be a little bit more critical of our big brothers and big sisters in New York City? But I just found that to be something that, a lot of people would have looked at me and said, come on, Allison, don't take it so seriously, or lay off. Like, they're pretty good. And perhaps I would have been looked at as a contrarian for saying, NBC doesn't always get it right, guys. Like, I don't think that's the best editorial decision. But just curious what your thoughts are on that, on the national influence.
Well, I think it's pretty strong with local affiliates now, because you're filling so much airtime, right? So your news producers are just going to take it and put it on the air. You can mitigate it where you can, but you have a staff that's fundamentally in sync with what the networks are doing, not necessarily what your market may demand or what you as a news director may want them to do. Yeah, it's really concerning. The amount of liberal bias in the media, I think, is substantial. And I think anybody who thinks it's not is, would be the word delusional. And it permeates into the local station rather dramatically. You'll see it in your newscast where they'll take a network story and run it. Like in my late news, I would not allow my producers to run a network story. They had to take the content and recraft it. But that's changed. But anyway, so it's very powerful, the amount of stuff that comes in. So if you're a CNN affiliate, which many stations are, you're an ABC, NBC, or CBS affiliate, or a Fox affiliate. So that's coming in. Then you're also getting content from the Associated Press. And if you look at it, or as I see it, it all kind of has a liberal spin on it. So how do you take that out? That's very, very difficult. And to that, I never saw, and I don't see today, any corporate people reading that back to the networks as to what they're doing. I don't see any general managers pushing back. No. So, why is that not? I mean, I felt as a news director, I'm just like one guy. What's my voice? Who can I, speak to about it? It'd be kind of fruitless.
How about you, Dave? Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, I just think the local station ought to be local. There's enough going on a local station that you could probably fill up the broadcast meaningfully. Now, the number of hours that you're doing, yes, you're going to pull from the networks, but the networks are not the end all. And I told Mike this other day, I was on the advisory board for CBS local affiliate board, and I was telling Mike, I went to a morning meeting in New York City and said in the morning meeting, there's a conference call worldwide, and its reporters are supposed to be giving feedback on what they think is the most important story of the day. The first question that was asked by the president of CBS News, what is on the front page of the New York Times today?
Wow.
And that was their barometer.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was in Houston, we had major national stories, literally, that were going on for days. And we would call the network and say, you need to look at this. And they would ignore us until it hit the front page of the New York Times. And they would scramble. So I just think we should really look locally as much as we can. I just think those days are no longer there because we're having to fill so much time.
So, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, you were bringing up looking at, say, the New York Times, but I remember back in my last newsroom, just even looking at the local competition, we had boards, digital boards all over the newsroom and the meeting rooms showing us who was clicking on what, how many people were watching this, how many people were in that. We could see our competition and what they were doing. So we were still even looking at our competition to gauge what we should be doing. And I'm curious your thoughts on that, because I do think that wasn't always helpful either. I can understand the argument for that, okay? Like you were saying, well, I think this was before we started recording, but you were talking about, or one of you guys was talking about, seeing you guys are live on something and the competition isn't, and you're there first, and it's like, okay, great, we beat them. But I'm curious when it comes to that, like, is that the healthiest way either to be determining your news coverage is our competition's covering this, so we got to figure out how to do it too, or not? Like, how much control should the competition have in your brain space when you're making those decisions?
I've always taken the approach of looking at them out the corner of my eye, but I've never really cared that much what they were doing, right? So if you want to be the station that's innovative and doing things nobody else is, and enterprising stories, which is a big thing. An awful lot of stations focus on that every day and are doing an excellent job of it. You can't let any outside factors kind of deviate you from your mission. So I've gone from not watching the other guys at all. Fundamentally, in my later years, I really didn't pay much attention to my competition because they didn't matter to me, because I knew what we needed to be. Right. But in a lot of newsrooms, they can be deeply affected by the other guys. But I would always put monitors in our control rooms of the other guys' newscasts, so the producer could see what was happening. And in a big major story, you could tell if they were on the story or not, right? And I would always stay on longer than the other guy if it was a big story. So, but it's incredibly, competitive in that regard. But again, every newsroom's different. Every news director's different. Every company's different. Every station's different. Stations are incredibly fragile, if I could throw that in. When new companies come in, they don't realize how fragile a station it is and how easy it is to take a number one station to number 3 in relatively short order, right? TV stations are like stock, that your ratings go up slowly if you're doing well, but if you're doing bad, they go down like an escalator. And you've seen stations just kind of kill themselves because they took, a wrong turn. And the managers came in, changed everything, and didn't realize or have a clue what they're doing. But.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply stations, your competition defines what you do in terms of on your own air. It's just a good barometer to see how well someone covers a story versus what you do. And you set up sort of a competition. Let's compete. Let's do better than what somebody else is doing. And it's mostly on major stories. Major stories will define a television station more than anything, and how well you handle it. I mean, Houston's had all kinds of weather issues, and one station will go wall to wall. One station will do partial wall to wall because someone probably upstairs is saying we can't afford to lose that revenue. So I think, again, it's so individual to each station and what each station feels like they need to do to keep money coming in the door, unfortunately.
Mike, you brought up liberal bias, so I want to jump to that topic. What are the most controversial issues that you feel like are getting treated differently because of whether it's explicit or implicit bias in that way? And how do you both think that bias leaks out into coverage? I think for me, some of the comments I see in the comment section on YouTube or when I do live streams, people assume a whole gamut of everywhere from direct propaganda from the government to reporters who have an agenda, and then just the person who has no idea what they're talking about. And there probably is, depending on the level, there's probably some of everything. For me, again, I think I already sort of mentioned this, there seemed to be more problematic to me, though less obvious, was, again, this, whether it was the not having the time to really critically think if you were somebody who wanted to, but also just the fear of what your colleagues and your peers are going to say, what is the public going to say about you? All of that stuff, to me, was more insidious and more problematic, though harder to spot. Because to me, it was like if you had a bunch of liars that were purposely trying to pull the wool over the public's eye, that to me is an easier problem to fix than a bunch of moral crusaders who are either too arrogant or too scared to step out of their echo chamber. So I'm just curious, what do you think about that? You brought up bias. Let's talk a little bit about that. And what do you think are some of the issues that are not being covered well right now because of that bias?
Well, a quick thing, local stations are good at a lot of things, right? And there are a lot of reporters, producers, news directors doing great work. So let me get that out of the way because I don't want to, just be here saying bad things about my profession because there's so many great things and so many great people. But TV stations now, because of the complexities of what we do, the time, mainly number one, the amount of workload that they have, that factors into pretty much everything. But what are stations good at? Big stories, weather, the shooting down the street, the car wreck, the highway that's blocked, all those basic things that are fundamentally just factual, right? Where you could go out and say, this happened and there's no question about it.
What happened in your community and you're the closest to it.
Right.
So you can actually, you're not just trying to take someone's word for it in New York City.
Correct. And, good at covering, the mayor, what the mayor did today and, the latest deal on street repairs, that sort of thing. They're excellent at that, all the basic things that we care about if you live in a community. What local stations aren't good about are the more subjective stories, right? I mean, you saw it with the Black Lives Matter. You didn't see any critical coverage of that. And I'm not saying there should have been, but everybody should be asked the tough questions. That was always my motto. Everybody should be asked to explain their position. So there are these biases that are just kind of built in or desires to ignore those stories because they're so hard to do. The race story, incredibly difficult. A number of stations have taken it on, but it still was tough. The abortion issue, very difficult, right? Biases built in there. The Second Amendment and gun issues, oh my God. Every newsroom in America, it's like, guns are bad, let's start there. Right? Nobody can even, if I ever see a story on anywhere covering the Second Amendment or guns and it's down the middle, I'm shocked. It's like, how did that happen? Right? Almost doesn't. So there just isn't this skepticism that needs to be there. There isn't this inquisitiveness, but at the same time, there's this fear to take those on because the peer pressure is huge in a newsroom where most of your staff is liberal and maybe you're in the middle and you don't talk or say what your political feelings are. And the peer pressure is huge, especially, I think, at the network level. I think they all just do stories for themselves and are totally oblivious to what their viewers are really interested in and how they ought to be critical and skeptical of the stories that they cover.
Yeah. I just think the rhetoric is so hot and the political narratives are so entrenched that if you're on the fence, like Mike says, you're not going to say anything. You're going to do what you're told to do at the network level. And at the network level, more often than not, the field producer produces for the reporter, and that field producer is getting directions from the newsroom and whoever's making those decisions. And I think there's an inability to really ask tough questions and to follow up on questions that are asked that are never answered. I mean, the talking points rule everything. And I'll sit and watch the news and I go, well, why was that question asked? It makes no sense. And the best example, I was watching NBC News earlier, and they had Dr. Fauci on talking about, well, we need to make sure that, we continue to social distance, and by the end of the summer, we should be out of this. Well, the question that wasn't asked of, how does he feel about the immigrants coming across the border that have COVID that are being bussed around the country? Why wouldn't you ask that question? And that's what I'm saying. The real tough questions are not asked. And it just seems like they have a narrative and the questions are sort of predetermined because we don't want to stir the pot. We don't want to get in trouble with, politicians or people on the right or people on the left. And I just think either we're scared to ask the questions or it's just the narrative is cooked in. And as Mike says, bias is built in and you're not going to do anything to disturb that bias.
Yeah, the concept of asking everybody the tough questions is non-existent.
Right.
I mean, when I was a kid, we used to watch this guy in Detroit. He had a show, and his name was Lou Gordon. And his concept was to ask everybody the toughest questions he could. And then I went on to become a journalist, and I thought, hey, that's a pretty good idea. I didn't care if you were Republican or Democrat. When I was a reporter, I hammered the daylights out of you. I didn't care. My whole thing was to be as apolitical as possible, as tough as I can, and as skeptical as I could as a reporter. That really doesn't exist so much today because of the groupthink that's taken over so many newsrooms. And it's just it's tough to beat it. It's tough to break through. I started out very liberal, in here's a testament to it. There's one of my early heroes, Dr. Hunter S. Thompson, right? New Times Magazine was very liberal. I used to be very liberal, but over time, you just kind of see the world a little bit differently and you become more skeptical of things and more questioning. But even when I was younger, I didn't care if you were, Republican or Democrat. I conservative or whatever, although I did have many interesting conversations with Dan Quayle. He went on to become vice president. His wife hated me, but because I just asked him tough questions. But asked the Democrat mayor of Fort Wayne, Indiana, if I cut him any slack. I didn't. But now there's this kind of favoritism to what Dave's talking about. And with the national media, which you really see, and if anybody says they don't see it, then you need to put your glasses on. With the Biden administration, there's so many questions that aren't being asked. On the COVID issue, there are so many questions the networks don't ask, right? I mean, they were happy to hammer Trump, and Trump was easy to hammer and certainly deserved it. But you're not seeing that now. It's like President Biden, he has some cognitive issues. Is anyone covering this issue? It is baffling to me that no one's talking about it. It's there every single day. So there's this protection of certain things that's not being done. That's what's frightening.
And I also think the way the national media covers news, and we always talk about a divided nation. Well, they're the ones that are dividing the nation. They're not balancing up their stories. And I hate to say it, but Lester Holt the other day said, fairness is overrated. How do you make that comment? I just don't understand how you can make that comment about anything. And he said, fairness is based on truth. Well, what is truth? Because I can see some of these political narratives out there, and it's factually not correct, but they say it's the truth. And unfortunately, there are people out there that will believe it, that it's the truth when it's not. But no one pushes back. There is no attempt to really define actually what the truth really is by perspective. Immigration is an issue. Why don't we have reporters down in Central America showing us what these people are fleeing from and why and how and what we can do to solve that problem? We always react to something instead of going deeper to where the story needs to start, where the story starts to really understand what's going on. And it's an issue of money. They don't want to spend the money, or it runs up against the narrative.
We covered a wide variety of topics in this interview, so this time I decided to upload them in separate, smaller chunks. This is not the first video, so if you want to see what else is out there, definitely check out the links in the description. Also, don't forget that this is Anti-Authoritarianism April. I have demonetized all of my uploads this month, so if you'd like to check out how you can support my work, there are links in the description, and I'll see you next time.